Welcome to the Daily AI News Digest. I'm your host, and today's explainer is brought to you by bestai.org. It's Monday, June 15, 2026, and we're tracking a major inflection point in the AI sector today. We're seeing a definitive, unignorable shift away from consumer experimentation and moving straight into a landscape defined by industrial-scale execution, localized sovereign hardware, and strict regulatory enforcement. So let's look at today's market realities. For today's agenda, we'll start with the biggest market moves. Then, we'll break down the latest product and model realities, followed by new regulations and business signals. Finally, we'll wrap up with the analysts' take on the broader AI economy. Let's dive right into Section 1, the biggest moves today. We've got some serious financial and regulatory shifts restructuring the market as we speak. $15 million. That's the estimated daily cash burn of OpenAI's video generator Sora. And today, we're looking at the cold business reality behind that number. OpenAI has officially pulled the plug on the Sora product line. Look, despite all the media attention and high-profile licensing agreements, the underlying economics just didn't work. The tool generated a mere $2.1 million in total lifetime revenue. Compare that to costing an estimated $15 million a day just to keep it running. It's a stark reminder that the industry is pulling back from high-burn consumer experiments if they don't have a clear, viable path to profitability. Now, shifting gears to Friday, we saw an unprecedented level of government intervention. Anthropic launched its Claude Fable 5 model publicly on June 9th. Just 3 days later, on June 12th, the U.S. Department of Commerce stepped in with a strict expert control directive, citing national security authorities. The catalyst sure was a reported code-based jailbreak. The directive essentially mandated the suspension of access by any foreign national, and yes, that even included Anthropic's own overseas employees. Since Anthropic couldn't realistically segment their massive user base by nationality in real time, they had no choice. They were forced to institute a total global suspension of the model that very same day. If you're running enterprise architecture, clarity on operational continuity is everything. So, let's be precise about the exact scope of this shutdown. The new Mythos class models, specifically Fable 5 and Mythos 5, are totally disabled for all users globally right now. But it's important to note that Anthropic's previous generation models are still up and running. Claude Opus 4.8 and Claude Sonnet 4.6 are completely unaffected by this US directive. They are continuing to process workloads at standard rates. So if your systems were heavily dependent on Fable 5, your immediate technical fallback is going to be Opus 4.8. Moving on to Section 2, Product and Model Realities. Let's step away from the macro market shocks and break down the factual technical benchmarks making headlines this week. Over at Google, we're seeing a laser focus on practical execution. Google Research just rolled out Gemini SQL2, which is powered by Gemini 3.1 Pro. Tracking the Bird's single model leaderboard, Gemini SQL2 has actually claimed the top spot with an 80.04% execution accuracy. It's an impressive jump past the previous leader, sure, but we need to look at the data objectively. It still trails the human baseline of 92.96% by nearly 13 points. The crucial takeaway with Gemini SQL2 isn't just the ranking, it's the enterprise utility. You see, the Bird benchmark measures whether the generated SQL actually runs and returns correct data, not just if the code syntax looks believable. By handling complex joins and window logic against messy real-world databases, Gemini SQL2 is targeting what Google calls execution-ready SQL. This is a strong indicator that we'll be seeing this integrated into Google's enterprise data services, like BigQuery Studio, to accelerate self-service analytics, rather than being used for consumer chat interfaces. And that divide between enterprise data execution and consumer deployment really brings us to Apple's WWDC 2026. Apple officially unveiled its next-generation Siri AI, and the rollout is built on a very specific multi-step architecture. First, your baseline requests are going to run locally on device using Apple's foundation models in iOS 27. Then, the more complex queries get routed to servers via their private cloud. But here's the catch. Managing all that server infrastructure is incredibly expensive. Based on analysis from Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, Apple is likely projecting a future subscription model, essentially a paywall, for Siri's advanced generative features. This would closely mirror the tiered systems we're already seeing from their competitors. That brings us to Section 3, Regulation, Policy, and Business Signals. Let's take a look at the physical infrastructure and hardware foundations that are actually making these shifts possible. Let's circle back to that Anthropic suspension for a moment, because there's a secondary business impact here that we absolutely can't ignore. The Fable 5 shutdown also forced Anthropic to halt Project Glasswing. Now, this was their highly restricted, vetted gateway program designed to give trusted partners like AWS and CrowdStrike secure access to those advanced Mythos-class capabilities. With Glasswing completely offline, the enterprise world is having to fundamentally rethink its approach to cloud-dependent AI procurement. Look at it this way. When a single federal directive can instantly sever access to a foundational model, market demand aggressively accelerates toward hardware sovereignty. Basically, companies want to own the compute locally. And that surging demand for sovereign local compute? Well, NVIDIA is stepping up to meet it directly. They've just moved their Vera Rubin architecture into full production. Their flagship NVL72 rack is a beast. It integrates 72 Rubin GPUs paired with 36 custom Vera CPUs, all packed into a single liquid-cooled system. It uses their 6th-generation NVLink fabric, which delivers a massive 260 terabytes per second of bandwidth. Overall, we're talking about a system capable of 3,600 petaflops of NVFP4 compute. These are the hard technical facts of an architecture that's purpose-built to scale agentic AI workflows and reinforcement learning right on premises, entirely insulated from any cloud-level access disruptions. To really grasp the hardware acceleration happening behind the scenes, we need to look at the performance multipliers of this new Rubin platform compared to the previous Blackwell generation. NVIDIA is reporting a 4x reduction in the GPUs needed for training large-scale mixture of experts models. But more importantly for actual deployment, it delivers up to a 10x higher inference throughput per watt. This hardware co-design approach effectively eliminates those traditional data movement bottlenecks. It's laying down the physical infrastructure needed for organizations that are now demanding localized AI factories. Finally, let's move to our last segment, the analyst's take. It's time to synthesize exactly what all these combined software, regulatory, and hardware developments mean for the AI economy moving forward. We're anchoring our analysis today on a really sobering data point from the Logicalist 2026 Global CIO Report. Get this. Even though 94% of organizations are increasing their AI spending, 51% of global chief information officers say AI is simply moving too fast. That statistic points to a very cold business reality. There is a rapidly widening gap between the raw underlying capabilities of these frontier AI models and a modern enterprise's actual ability to manage them safely, legally, and sustainably. So let's connect the dots here and look at the macro trend defining the second half of 2026. The industry is officially pivoting. First, we're seeing a hard retreat from unconstrained, high-burn consumer experimentation. The Sora shutdown is proof of that. Second, we're witnessing the strict, immediate enforcement of national security controls, just as we saw with Fable 5. Because of that, we're tracking a massive surge in demand for localized, sovereign hardware solutions like NVIDIA's NVL72, so companies can mitigate those cloud dependency risks. And finally, software development is refocusing away from the hype and toward highly practical, verifiable enterprise execution, beautifully demonstrated by Gemini SQL 2. All of this leaves enterprise decision-makers with a critical evaluation to make. The era of unregulated, purely cloud-dependent AI expansion really seems to be closing. As global regulations continue to tighten unpredictably and the baseline costs of frontier compute soar, you have to ask yourself, is your organization practically prepared for an era of strict AI hardware sovereignty? Think about it. Do you have robust contingency plans in place if your primary cloud AI vendor gets taken offline by a federal directive tomorrow morning? That wraps up today's analysis of the AI sector's market realities. We're going to keep monitoring the Anthropic suspension and the continued rollout of NVIDIA's new hardware very closely. Thank you for joining us for the Daily AI News Digest. Just a reminder, this explainer is sponsored by bestai.org. Be sure to visit them and subscribe for your daily, highly objective breakdown of the AI market. Have a productive week, everyone.